Welcome to Talking Early Years, a showcase training podcast with Ellen Roberts
and Gemma Carr.
Hello and welcome to today's Talking Early Years podcast. So on today's episode, we're going to be discussing everything speech, language and communication, and we have our special guest speaker today, Laura Sykes. Hello, Laura, how are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yes, very good, thank you. Unfortunately, Ellen is not with us today, so it's just me solo. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Laura. This is your first time on the podcast. What do you do? What's got you to where you are? Who are you?
It's perfect. So I'm currently lead tutor and curriculum lead for Showcase Training. I've been a tutor for 5 years now, but previous to that I worked in early years, so kind of around about 13 years. Did lots of different roles from qualified up to manager. I was a Senko in one of the settings I worked in as well, and decided once I reached that manager level that I wanted to do something different, and that's then when I looked at coming across to tutoring and almost kind of supporting apprentices to go into early years.
Nice, lovely. So we are talking everything speech, language and communication today. What's happening currently? What we're kind of seeing? What's sort of some of the things that we're seeing in setting or coming through our learners? You know, what are some of the typical things that we've got going on?
So I would say, there's of course lots of different additional needs across the board, but I would say particularly speech and language delay is coming through from my learners, from managers that I speak to, and also from, when I was in a setting in a Senko role, that was kind of our main area within the settings I worked in. It was that speech and language delay, almost versus that speech and language impairment, and kind of which is it, what is it that we need to be doing to support them if it's a delay and if it's more of that kind of impairment.
Yeah, absolutely. So is it it's something we have talked about sort of loosely on other podcasts, thinking about, we've spoken about sort of a COVID child. Is there more being seen now post-COVID about communication concerns?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I had a lot of conversation with managers post-COVID, and speech and language was one of the things that seemed to had increased. That there was that speech and language delay. So I don't know if that was because people weren't socialising as much, so you weren't speaking as much, children weren't hearing conversation as much in those different situations. Also, they weren't in an early year setting where, of course, it's that language-rich environment, so maybe they didn't have those opportunities, which is where that delay maybe came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of there could be that environmental factor, but equally there could be the biological factor as well. So thinking about the maybe more environmental factors, what other environmental factors can there be that are impacting on communication and language?
So I think there can be a lot, like you say, kind of that social aspect I think is really important. So I think even those interactions you have at home with the parents, the families, that family structure, if you've got a single parent and one child, or you've got a single parent and multiple children, is there multiple adults within the family? So I do think that family structure, that environment has an impact, as well as that home learning environment, I think can have an impact as well, depending on, do they have books at home? Things like that can have, I think, an impact as well when it comes to speech, language and communication.
Talking home environment, what about TVs, iPads, those kind of, they are so prevalent, aren't they, at the moment? I've worked in settings where I couldn't get an iPad to work, and a 4-year-old took it and made it work for me. Like it is, I've just gone, oh no, what's that? Yeah, and they've gone blah, 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 and it's just worked. So children are using this technology. So is that having an impact on speech and language?
Yeah, I think it could, but I think it could have positive or negative effects. I think it depends. I think if digital resources, whether that's tablets, TV, or other kind of resources that we do have within early years, can be a positive. It can enhance speech and language and support and promote speech, language and communication development. But of course, with the digital world we live in, there is a lot of talk around how much screen time should children be having, and does that have a negative impact on speech, language and communication? And I think there is an argument for both for and against, and I think it does come down to that amount of time. Like if they've got an amount of time on screens, how much time are they having off of that? How much of that is reading books? How much of that is going to the park and talking about the things that are around them as well? So I think it's a balance, but I can imagine that is quite tricky today. Everything is online, and particularly for older children, even their homework's online now, which again is post-COVID, but I think that then makes it hard to limit the screen time that children have.
Absolutely. I remember when I was working in a setting, I had a young girl, she was preschool age at the time, and she was bilingual, so her mum was Spanish and her father was English. I had never met the father, but mum had a very thick Spanish accent. And this child was talking with an American accent. And I said to mum, I said, oh, she always speaks with an American accent. Is dad American? And she said, oh, no, he's British. And she just went, it's YouTube. And this little girl was speaking with a very strong American accent because that's what she was watching. You know, on YouTube, we can't always watch just English, British videos. Children see a lot of American content. So it's kind of thinking about that, how that's affecting their way that they're learning to talk. And again, those accents that they're no doubt picking up. And kind of, is that a problem? Or is that just the way it's going? But then it kind of also kind of, you almost want to kind of think a little bit about the British values when we talk about that as well. It kind of comes into that affecting kind of personal identity, but also as a nation kind of keeping our accents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think YouTube is very popular. I mean, I've got a nephew who's 5 and knows all about the different channels are on there that he's allowed to watch and that he enjoys watching. Some of them, you know, are really educational and do support with speech and language and communication, and others, like I say, would question, are they picking up bad habits? I don't want to call them bad habits, but I think sometimes they are when it comes to pronouncing things. And, you know, if we're learning it for the first time, is that helpful to learn it with a different accent, or is that not helpful? Once you've got a strong take on speech language communication and are maybe a bit older, it might be fine because you can kind of differentiate between the two. But when you're younger and learning, is that useful? You know, we talk a lot in early years about we don't want you to learn the wrong way of phonics, because if you learn the wrong way of phonics, it then impacts on how you learn to read. Could that be similar there, that if you're learning it with accents, or like you say, the kind of American way of saying things, is that having a positive impact? But like I say, is it also just one of those things and something that we're going to have to cope with and manage moving forward, maybe?
I think also the terminology as well, sort of words that the American language uses, for example, diaper, whereas we use nappy, you know, and again, it's those words that we're saying to children, and kind of you know, making sure that we are saying the British way and kind of not repeatedly correcting the children, but just when we are talking, using those English words that are the English language opposed to the English American language.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can just repeat it back in the correct way, embedding those British values that you've already mentioned.
Which I think is what we do throughout our sustained shared thinking. It's kind of everything we're doing anyway, aren't we? You know, with the younger children, we are repeating things back to them, even if they just are sort of saying something slightly wrong, we just repeat the words back to them and kind of, oh yes, we would do. So I think it's interesting to think about that. So what about dummies? Again, there's a lot of that is another environmental factor that can impact on children's speech, language and communication. So what do dummies mean to you? Again, there's personal opinions on them. There's different ways that they're seen by everybody in the profession as parents. Tell me your thoughts.
So personally can see why there is a place for them for soothing if they're going to bed, all of those types of things. But also having been within early years and been in that Senko role, some of the speech and language delays were because of overuse of a dummy and having it all the time and trying to talk around the dummy. You know, within early years practice, I was always taught to ask the child to take the dummy out of their mouth when they were talking so that they could form those sounds in the correct way. And we quite often in early years have a rule, they have their dummy when they're upset or sleeping, but other than that it goes away, and they're not walking around with it because it does prevent them from having that conversation. So yeah, I think there is a place for them if they need it to go to bed or to soothe them if they're upset, if it's a comforter for them, but I think as just general play, they can affect that speech, language and communication and how they interact with other children as well.
Absolutely. For me, it's the physical deformation of the child's mouth as well. There's sort of the gap that can kind of pronounce up the front. And, you know, again, that all completely changes that speech, language, communication and kind of how those words are formed. Like you say, take the dummy out when you're asking the child, asking them to reply to you. But it's a very controversial topic, but maybe thinking the same as technology. It's how much those are used, when they're used. You know, I think some families do it as okay, you have your dummy when you're in bed, but dummy stays in bed for sleep time and sleep time only. Whereas if you're outside, you can have a muzzy or something like that as a comfort if you still need that, a muzzy, a teddy or something like that instead. But yes, personally, I don't think they are ideal. However, equally at the same time, sometimes if children don't have a dummy and they want something to suck, they might go for sort of a 2-finger or a thumb. And often what I say is you can't remove that though. You know, with a dummy, you can have the dummy fairy come and there can be that sort of transition process and you can kind of support the child through that when you feel age appropriate. Whereas if they've kind of gone to sucking a thumb or fingers, it's much harder to stop that, but you can still get those change in palates, in tooth positioning and those sorts of things because of the use of that comfort with the hand as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would almost argue that the impact on teeth, gums, all of those when you're putting your thumb or fingers in the mouth is probably more severe than a dummy, and like you say, you can't take it away because of the way it loops around, whereas a dummy is kind of molded differently. So yeah, I would say if there is a choice between dummy or thumb, personally I think you're going to go dummy, because you can then, like you say, wean off, make some rules around it. You can't do that with a thumb or a finger. It definitely makes it a lot more challenging because it's attached. You know, whereas a dummy you can, you know, like you say, there is things like the dummy fairy, or you know, you can leave your. I've seen people do it at Christmas. They leave the dummy, and the dummy gets taken away to be given to other babies that now need it, and then they replace with a toy, or you know, something like that. So yeah, there's lots of ways that you can transition from the use of a dummy. Whereas, yeah, I agree with you, you can't do that with a thumb or a finger. So I think if it is a choice, this is it.
Okay, so thinking, do you have any other examples of environmental factors that can impact on child's speech, language and communication? Is there anything else that you've kind of experienced in your practice?
So not really from an environmental factor, more from I guess a medical factor. So if something like a child's got a hearing concern, or has got glue ear, or there's a tongue tie, also more kind of like a medical side of things, then that can have an impact as well. You know, things like tongue tie can be sorted out quite early on when they're little, quite easily. If there is that, I think if you delay it, it gets harder to solve, and I think there's more of an impact. But yeah, there are those kind of more biological, I guess, kind of factors that could have an impact.
Definitely with tongue tie, from personal experience, I know that can be kind of highlighted within days of birth, and can be picked up and kind of, like you say, managed, supported, dealt with immediately. almost. And that can be seen sort of on a breastfeeding scale sort of elements of the child's struggling to latch. That can be where that could be highlighted or kind of first noticed. Thinking about the glue ear, an easily solvable situation for glue ear as well. So that would be a case of the child having a day surgery and having grommets fitted, which basically sort of hold open the ear canal. So talk to me a little bit about delayed speech. What can impact that? Where can that come from? How can that be sort of seen?
So I think there's a couple of different ways. I mean, something that I've observed is that speech delay within some children, depending on, again, kind of their background, on I guess parenting style. Some people are naturally very chatty, and other people are naturally quieter, shyer, so probably don't talk as much around their children. And we did quite notice that with a couple of children when I worked in settings around that delay, that it wasn't that they weren't able to speak, it's that they weren't listening or having those opportunities. And a lot of it came around in early years. We know it as commentating play, don't we? And we just constantly talk about what we're doing, what the children are doing. And I think for parents, if you don't know early years, you probably feel a bit silly doing that, or you don't do it naturally. Just taking the bins out, I'm just going to do the washing up. You
what's
wouldn't
that over there? What can I see in the garden?
I'm just going to do the hoovering now. You wouldn't commentate what you were doing at home. And I think for some people might do, because they might be quite chatty and quite like the idea of talking to themselves. A lot of us do that. But if you're a quieter person and you don't, and you do just kind of walk around and get things done, that child's not hearing that language. And so every parent's different, every person's different. Of course, some of us are shyer and quieter, but I do think that can have an impact when you've got a little one around. And it is delay. The more opportunities they have, the more language they hear from going to an early years setting, for example, they can catch up on that delay. But it is about the opportunities that they have. They say quite often that you need to hear a word 200, 300 times before you can use it and understand it. So depending on how much language is around that child depends on how their speech, language and communication develops.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's a big thing that I always promote is narrating our lives and talking about it. And it probably infuriates my dog, but I don't have a child to do it to, so instead I do it to my dog all day instead. But again, it's again not feeling silly for doing that. It's what we need. That if it is just the mother and the child at home all day, there is a chance that child may, and they're conscious of not letting the child have TV on and things like that. That child may not hear any talking for an entire day. So again, just I'm going to put the kettle on now. Oh, we should I'll message Granny and see what all those kind of things. Like just narrating those things is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's letting parents know that. I think quite often we get caught up on, we need to buy these resources and we need to buy books and we need to buy IT resources, talking tins, all of these things that we do have within early years settings. And I think sometimes we can get caught up on, we need to spend money and buy stuff. And actually what we need to do is share with parents the importance of narrating and commentating play, the importance of singing a song or reading a book. Because for me, I think that has more of an impact positively on speech, language and communication than having these all singing, all dancing resources. I think it's remembering the importance of what parents and adults can do and the impact we can have just by talking, just by singing.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, right, we need all these books. The baby can't read. So if you're not going to look through them and talk through them and, what's that? What colour's that one? What can we see there? And again, it's not expecting an answer. It's not expecting them to do all those things. But again, you as a person just need to be doing that. And again, that's what we should be doing in setting. And I think once you do it in setting, you don't feel so silly doing it in the home environment. But like you say, kind of promoting to parents, this is what we need, and don't feel silly for doing it.
And it's interesting you should mention that, because I actually spoke to one of my learners this week about communicating with younger children in the setting. In the store where they don't respond to you, so I find it easier talking to the older children. And I said I can absolutely understand that, but I said it's about asking questions but not expecting a response. And you respond to that, and you talk about what they're doing, what you're doing. And I said the more you practice that, the more confident you will become. And I think it's an important tool for anybody working in early years or anybody interacting with children to know the importance of talking, of asking questions, of reading, of singing, of just communicating around a child and to a child to support them with that speech and language kind of development, but also with any delays. You know, it will help for any delay to kind of improve.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So what about sort of on an anxiety element? You kind of spoke about sort of quiet houses and kind of quieter environments, but what about anxiety? How can that play a part?
So I think there's a couple of elements there. I mean, it could be anxiety from adults in their lives. You know, if an adult is anxious, that can naturally have an impact, because you could be worried about, am I doing that right? Am I doing this wrong? And that anxiousness can then transfer onto a child, not always, but also there can be children that are quite anxious and that worry about getting something wrong, and so then choose not to say something, and that anxiety can lead to things like selective mutism, which which I have experienced within early years. And it is then about supporting that anxiety and that confidence, so that then they will talk and share what they're thinking, and not worry about if it's right or wrong. You know, it doesn't matter. But I think it is important to be aware of that, and if that is observed, look at what things can be put in place to support anybody that is feeling anxious.
Yeah. So if you've experienced that and kind of you've supported children with that in your past and whilst working in settings, what are some things that maybe you could take to learners to do, or kind of support people if they're going through that?
So I kind of spoke to the child's key person at the time and said, I think that kind of there's anxiety, that selective mutism was there. And it was only in the setting at home, mum would share videos with us of this child talking fluently at home, having a lovely time. It was just in the setting. And, we kind of thought that it linked to that anxiety of being worried about what to say, who in front of. And so we kind of looked at it as spending more one-to-one time. So the key person started spending some time each day when the child was in, doing different speech and language activities. They were under a speech and language therapist, and they've given us some activities to do. And these were also being done at home by parents as well. So the key person was doing this on one-to-one, and the child started to open up, but only with that one member of staff. Anybody else looked over and it just shut completely down. So left it as just kind of a one-to-one for a good couple of months, and then over time added in one friend that the child did like to play with, and then built up that communication. And actually, by the time the child went to school, though they were still what I would call a shy child, they were more confident talking to other members of staff. But it was just about that, I think, that confidence to trust that key person. And I think it highlights why that key person relationship is so important. I think once that relationship was built up and the child trusted them, that worked. But the other thing that the key person did was looked at what that child's interests were, and one of the interests was Frozen. So this member of staff would have, of course, Frozen, very popular. The member of staff knew some of the songs already, and so would sing the songs with this child and would role play with some Frozen characters that the child had brought in. So using the interest really helped to build that bond, so the anxiety reduced, and then they felt confident enough to talk. So I found that really supported that child, and it helped them get to those next steps and feel confident in the end. But it took some time and a lot of patience from the key person as well to try different things. And like I said, we did work with speech and language therapists as well, and they gave lots of different activities to do, because initially it wasn't selective mutism that was diagnosed, it was just that this child wasn't talking. And so of course it was, we had different resources. They gave us the Mr. Tongue book, which is quite common in early years. Speech and language therapists will quite often give that as a resource to use with any children that have got
Mhm.
anything related to speech and language. And so started off with activities of that, posting activities, and just kind of built from there, really. But yeah, definitely a success story there.
Good. That's really nice to hear. And like you say, kind of she's built that confidence up to go to school as well. So speaking there, you've spoken about kind of working with speech and language therapists, professionals. What, for those people who have never experienced it, or people who maybe are doing a level 2, so kind of aren't involved in those, even level 3 sometimes aren't involved in those meetings, what do those meetings look like, sort of when you're with a speech and language therapist?
So I've only ever had good experiences, actually. I mean,
Mhm.
you do hear of some horror stories, but I've actually found professionals, particularly speech and language therapists that I've worked with, very approachable, and we've been able to communicate well with them through email and through phone calls, arrange meetings where they come into the setting. And when they're in the setting, they always, I found they've always liked to see that child, observe them in practice, but they also want to speak to the key person and look through observations, meet with the parents as well. Whenever we had meetings, we would always invite the parents to come along as well. Majority of the time, somebody would come, sometimes not because of work commitments and things, but we'd always make sure they had a handover, had everything that was discussed, and have access to all of the reports. But it's very much, it's that partnership working. It's working together, working collaboratively, sharing your thoughts of what the child's doing, sharing the parents' views if they're not there, but also being that voice for the child as well of anything that they said or you've observed. But yeah, I found those meetings to be very beneficial. I come away with lots of strategies. If those strategies don't work, could always ring the speech and language therapist and ask questions. One of the settings I worked in, we had one speech and language therapist for all of the children that had speech and language in our setting. And that was really useful because it meant we could build that relationship up and just ring and say, oh, look, this hasn't worked. Have you got another suggestion? Is there something else you could support us with? And you could have that call for information, advice and guidance. So yeah, just important to have that communication and work through any barriers that are there when it comes to working in partnership with outside agencies.
Do they give you, so you sort of said they give you kind of resources, do they give you kind of activities, things like that you can recreate and repeat with the children, things like that?
Yes, absolutely. So at the end of each time we had somebody come in, we would almost have this report, and on the end of it would have some ideas of some different strategies that we could use. And also I had one speech and language therapist that actually came in and did a couple of activities with the child, so you could observe how to do it. And a lot of it was around posting activities or supporting children with that positional language, put this on, put this in, those types of things. But it was really useful to see that being role modeled by a speech and language therapist to then be able to copy that and share that with my colleagues. And, we were all able to then use the same strategies. We actually found in the end that there were strategies we could use with any children in the setting, even if they weren't under speech and language therapist. And actually there was benefits to that as well.
And I think that's it as well, isn't it? You have these tools and actually you can use them with any children. You don't have to say we can only use them with the children who have got speech delay. You can use them with all of your children, and that can be something, if you start thinking, well, maybe there's a bit of delay, that some of those things might be something that Senko recommends to you to try, or things like that as well. From previous experience, we did this with a previous child. Why don't you give that a go, and then we'll see how we get on, and things like that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that, to not think, oh, I've been given this for this child and that's so I can only use it for this child. Absolutely not. It's very beneficial to do these activities that we're given by other professionals, be that speech and language, or even if it's portage. It's really useful to use the activities and the strategies we've got with all children, really. They will get the benefits from it, and there will be some learning and development naturally taking place. But yeah, that partnership working, that open and honest communication is really important.
Absolutely. So how do you work with the parents? You've said that they kind of join in with the meetings and kind of can be in a phone calls and kind of a present for them. How do you maybe support parents or encourage parents to understanding the needs of the speech and language for their children, and potentially sort of removing those barriers?
Absolutely. So, of course, because it is additional needs, in order to make any referral, you need parent permission. So it's really important that you have those open, honest and conversations with parents from the offset. If you have got a concern, let's have a discussion about it, see if there's similar concern at home. Sometimes there will be, and sometimes there won't be. Sometimes parents, it can be a bit defensive, and I think that's because sometimes there can be a lot of stigma around additional needs and needing support. So I think sometimes the immediate thing is to go, no, they're fine, and they're absolutely fine at home, they do this at home. So I absolutely understand that defensiveness that can come across sometimes. So that can be a challenge and a barrier, because then you've got to work with that parent to support them to understand that we think this would be a good idea, and we'd like to help and put the referral in order to kind of gain that extra support for their child. And the majority of parents that I have worked with, even if maybe initially they might feel, oh, no, I don't think my child needs that, after a little bit of work and looking at observations and talking about what you've observed and what you've seen, parents want the best for their children. And I've had parents say to me in the past, oh, actually, yeah, just refer them. I don't think they'll be on it long, but just refer them, because I know that they've had what they need. And that's fine, because that works for all parties. It means you get the support that you need, and then they're on it for so long, and then maybe they get signed off. But it means that they've had that support. So I think it is about, again, that open, honest communication with parents. And it is that honesty about, oh, we've seen this, have you seen that, what have you heard? And if they are hearing something different, see if they can video it and share something with you so you can see it, because it might be that they're only in the setting 2 mornings a week, and so they're not that confident yet in the setting. So it can be useful, but it is really important to, open and honest communication, definitely with professionals, but also with parents.
I think it's also important to kind of have those conversations at the beginning when you first start noticing something's not quite right, because you can almost bamboozle a parent and say, right, we need to refer your child because they've got speech and language concerns, and they're going, hold on, how is this the first time I've ever heard about it? So it's keeping up. Do they do that at home? Have you noticed they've been doing this a little bit? And kind of almost that sort of planting of the seed almost but equally just keeping the parents up to date with those changes, those next steps that you're supporting the child with as well. I've just noticed they're a little bit behind on this. Are they able to do it at home or not? Do you ever see them doing things like that? And kind of start having those conversations from an early observation, kind of seeing that and straight away talking to the parent about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. I think if you, like you say, do suddenly it come out of nowhere with, oh, we're going to make this referral because of X, Y, and Z, I would be a bit defensive. I'd be defensive, but so of course somebody's going to get defensive. But like you say, that honest conversation, mention little things here and there, like you say, have the next steps around speech and language, and having those conversations so that it's not a shock. And I think also every setting will have a different process, but in a lot of settings I worked in, it would be, if you've got a concern, you have a chat with the parents about those concerns, then you would mention that you're going to raise it with your Senko to do some observations, and then your Senko would be having those conversations with parents as well. So it is about having that open communication and having it early on, but also making sure that you're following those procedures in your setting of who gets involved. Or I might just get, my room leader's going to do an observation, our Senko's going to, whatever that procedure is, so that they know it's not just one person making this decision about their child. It has been checked out, and we're not doing it lightly by making a referral.
No. I think it's in situations like this, you have the definition of partnership working, don't you? This is what partnership working is. This is the definition of why it's important to have this partnership working, isn't it? And kind of all those different people who can be involved and be present and have an involvement in, and everything that is just everything to do with partnership working, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Quite often we talk about this triangle almost around the child, don't we? With the child at the centre and all of the adults, professionals, anybody else involved around them, within that triangle. And I think it absolutely rings true when it comes to speech, language and communication. And if we've got any concerns around delays, because you've got to work together to support the child in the middle to reach those next steps.
Completely.
In speech, language and communication, as we know, underpins all areas of learning and development. So it is really, really important to recognise if there is a delay or a concern, and put things in place to support children to reach those next steps. And it's important that there's that consistency. We're doing that, not not just in the setting, but we're sharing that with parents, and of course getting other professionals involved when needed as well. So yeah, speech language communication development definitely it underpins all of that partnership working that we need to see within early years.
For sure, definitely. So thinking about that partnership working, is there things that we can maybe give to the parent, or resources that are typically, we've spoken about Mr. Tongue, but sort of typically, is there anything that's often given to parents that they might be able to use, or even things that they've already got at home that they can use?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a lot of resources that we can make in early years, whether it's a posting game. I remember making a post box game with different pictures and making one in the setting, and then making one for the parents to have at home. And again, it comes back to these resources don't have to be expensive. They can be things that we can make. And I think that's really important to make sure that it's inclusive. It's something that we could all make and use. I remember even in setting we had a library, and so if parents didn't have books at home but wanted to borrow a book, they could borrow books and then bring them back again. So I think things like that are really good resources to use. If there's something we can make and use in a setting, can we do the same at home? Even like I said there, Mr. Tongue, can we make a copy so they've got a copy at home if that's going to help? So I think there are lots of resources like that we can use to support families. But also there is a lot of information online, and that can feel like a bit of a minefield, but there are some really useful websites. Speech and Language have got their own official website, which has got lots of information about how to create a communication and supportive environment, looking at the physical environment, the adult's role and opportunities for communication. So again, not focusing on buying lots of resources, but on what you can do. And the BBC actually also have a website called Tiny Happy People, and there are loads of tools on there for
talking. There is so much on there at the moment. Like, I've really heard a massive push for that at the moment, and even parenting guidance on there with certain things as well. So there's a lot that would be a great source to have a look at. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it would be also like in earlier, I remember we used to have a leaflet on speech language and communication, and we had like information in there. So we'd almost be creating one of those now, but having all of these useful links on it. And yeah, I agree with you. Tiny Happy People's got lots about parenting, but it's also got tools for talking for all age groups, gives hints and tips, and again focuses on what you can do, going to the park, asking questions, talking about what you're doing, trying to talk more rather than asking questions, so trying to make more comments. It gives you things that everybody can do. So I think it's important to share that information, advice and guidance with parents, whether it's the strategies or whether it's things that they can do. But yeah, I think it's important to share these web links, share the resources that we do know about, because there is a lot of useful information out there for parents.
I think it's really important. Again, we say it umpteen times on our podcast, but the correct resources, informative resources. We've got Instagram, we've got TikTok, we've got YouTube, but those are not mediated. Those are not officially correct. So actually, to have a look at these different websites that we've spoken about, language.org, foundationyears.org, if it's got a .org, it's the correct information. That is A, the most up to date, and B, completely 100% trustworthy. That is a safe website to give to parents. This is really useful. Have a try of that. I think one resource that often people forget about is your Senko. Your Senko has got a lot of information up there and knows a lot, or at least knows how to find the information for that. So I think the Senko should always be your first port of call, and kind of, why don't you have a chat with the Senko and see what they can do to support you? And again, it could just be an information, advice, guidance meeting, where they just kind of support parents with stuff like that. But having those conversations, and again, opening that up as the partnership, is really important. One thing I do want to make clear is, obviously there is things that we've kind of highlighted and things that we can kind of go, oh yes, I can see there's a delay there. To be really important to all staff working in nurseries, we do not diagnose anything. We are not here to say they've got glue ear, or they've got this, or that's tongue tie. That is not what our role is. Our role is to best support the child to develop. And if that's a case of we need to refer them to find out what the issue is, sure, it may well come back with glue ear, but it's no place for us to go to a parent and say your child has glue ear, or something of that the making. We do not And again, that covers everything SEND as well, doesn't it? You know, we are not here to diagnose children with anything. We are just here to support the children to best develop and give them those support and resources around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. We are not medical professionals, and
No.
we're not to make those diagnoses. Even if in your head, from personal experience, you might think, oh, I think that might be autism, or that might be this. But that's fine to have in your head, but it's not something you share with parents, because you might be wrong. You know, we're not medical professionals, but we can say we've got concerns about this. Maybe speak with the SENCO, maybe speak with your doctor, you know, and just kind of from there you can then find out any official diagnosis and then support with the support from there. But yeah, I agree with you. It's really important that we don't name anything that we suspect or that we've got concerns about, and we need to be quite open with it and just say, we've got a bit of concern about their speech, or a bit of concern, or do you think they can hear what I'm saying, you know, those types of things, rather than kind of saying, oh, we think it might be like I say gluey, or tongue tie, or you know, like I say, it's not for us to kind of make those decisions.
Yeah, and equally, it's not our decision to say when a child should have their dummy removed or things like that. You know, we are going off what the parents do at home and keeping that consistency as well. So yes, we can do all those things where we say, please take your dummy out when you're talking to me. Take your dummy out when you're answering, because I can't quite hear you properly. That's one thing. But to say, no, you're not having your dummy, you're too old for your dummy, I'm taking that away from you at sleep time. That's not your decision to make either. No,
I agree with you. I think it's really important that we work in partnership with the parents. We can share information, advice and guidance. We can share recommendations, but you're absolutely right. That is not our decision to make. We need to respect parents' decisions and support the child. It would be really unfair for them to be allowed to have their dummy at home, and then when they come into us one day, we take that away. That's not okay. We do have to work in partnership.
Absolutely. So, Laura, this is a question to all of our guests that we ask at the end of our podcast. So, what was your dream job when you were a child, and why?
My dream job. So, funny enough, I always wanted to be a primary school teacher.
Okay.
I've got a lot of teachers in my family, and so growing up, always wanted to work with children. But wanted to go down the primary school teacher route. And I think it was because a lot of my family were teachers. I wanted to support children to learn and grow and reach their full potential, but also thought it would be fun, to kind of work with children.
And it is, we know that.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of going down the primary school teacher route, obviously went into early years and then into tutoring. So still kind of, I think, got what I wanted from it. Like, I enjoy what I do. Then. No, but not completely far away from what I used to dream of when I was a child.
Lovely. That's really nice to hear. It's really nice to hear that you kind of always had that working with children in your head, and kind of again, as we've progressed, we kind of tweak that slightly, but that you have kind of stayed in that early years. That's really nice to hear. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and thank you, Laura, for joining us today. It's been lovely having you. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on the topics we've covered, or answer any questions you might have about what we've discussed. Your input really helps shape our conversations. As always, don't forget to like, share and follow this podcast to stay updated. And as always, let's keep the conversation going about early years. Until next time, take care and keep making a difference.